Unspoken Issues.
All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Unspoken Issues Podcast. We are getting you ready to jump back into some 90s comics, and oh my goodness, we've got a good one for you here today. We are going to be discussing the 5-issue miniseries of Gen 13, along with issue half and issue 0. I feel like the 90s is where we finally just decided, okay, numbers really don't matter. At least the sequence of numbers doesn't matter anymore.
No, they never mattered, man. You're talking about where one issue would be like My Greatest Adventure and then the next. It was just Doom Patrol. Now it was just Doom Patrol number like 106 or whatever it was. They turned Journey into Mystery into Thor, Tales of Suspense into Captain America, whatever. Numbers never mattered. The only thing numbers really mattered for is if you started a new title, you had to pay the post office more.
It's true. Gen 13 is on the agenda. That was Dean Compton. You just heard.
I am Dean Compton.
He is.
Guy who's telling you how it is.
He is, as a matter of fact. So, Dean, you threw this one on the schedule.
I did.
Any particular reason why?
You know, mostly because it was a big deal. I can't remember the last time I read it. It would have had to have been pre-2000 probably. And it's just a big deal that, I don't know, somehow, I don't want to say it gets forgotten. That seems a little extreme. But I don't know, maybe forgotten isn't a little extreme because it's like this thing falls off a cliff. They try and restart like Wildstorm, it seems like every, 3 years or so. And it's always like Wildcats, Authority, Stormwatch, but some of the other Wildstorm IP doesn't get the attention it deserves. I get why no one's gonna, like DC isn't like, hey, let's bring back Divine Right, The Adventures of Max Faraday. I get why that's probably not going to set the world on fire right now, but Gen 13 did set the world on fire in its time, and in theory, it should be easily timeless. Mm-hmm. You're talking about teenagers getting superpowers, discovering themselves and their powers along the way. And you look back at the 90s, and I think it was actually a better decade for teenage superheroes than it may seem. And Gen 13 is one of the big three. I think the big three are New Warriors, Gen 13, and Young Justice, with Generation X just on the outside looking in. Mostly because, since they're all part of, the X-Men world, they get caught up in that a little bit. Sometimes it can be easy to forget that the Generation X kids are kids. You never forget that the Gen 13 kids are kids or the Young Justice kids are kids. Or even until later issues of the New Warriors kids are kids. And so I think that it's important to remember that superhero comic books generally have been aimed at 12 to 16-year-olds. And this was a book that was, supposed to be aimed directly at them. Jim Lee doing character designs. This book was aimed directly at them, for them. Jim Lee doing character designs. J. Scott Campbell hitting the ground running with, to start his storied career. Brandon doing what he does, writing Wildstorm stuff, because he don't do nothing else. But
right.
They really hit a home run with this one. I think it's hard to disagree in a lot of ways. I just want to look at it because covering all things 90s, one of the things we try and do is cover a lot of stuff that may not be on, the regular path, but sometimes something's so good, you got to get to it. I think this was a hallmark moment. It was a turning point in comic books, for different reasons. Probably the first hot book after the Speculator crash. So there's also some extracurricular reasons why it's big, but it was a big deal. We should talk about it.
All right. Yeah, I remember the buzz about Gen 13.
You remember Gen X?
Gen X. Didn't you guys say that it was that was the name of them prior to, or what was?
Yeah, it was the original title of Gen 13, but Marvel was like, you can't do that, Generation X. And then they made a change, but Marvel was like, that's not enough. It will still confuse people with codename Genetics.
Mm. Well,
that's what they said.
So myself, hearing about Gen 13, I never read this up until today. I own probably a couple issues, but I do remember Deathmate Black. I do remember finding out that Deathmate Black was the first appearance of Gen 13.
On some level it is. It's one of those things. It's a scheduling quirk. They had solicited Gen 13 maybe as Gen X, and then they Image had gotten so late that Diamond had changed the rules and said, listen, if you're this late, people get their money back. So they pulled the solicitation because they didn't think that subsequent issues would be on time. And the amount of time it took them to get their shit together on Gen 13, Deathmate came out, and Gen 13 was in it. So it's a scheduling quirk more than anything that makes Death Make Black Gen 13's first appearance. And there are some people who don't, it's one of those things where people don't consider it the first appearance. Some people don't. Like, I forget which X-Men annual, but one of the X-Men annuals has Gambit in it before Uncanny 266, but most people think Uncanny 266 is still the first appearance because it doesn't make sense otherwise. And in the case of Death to Make Black, it's a fake reality.
Yeah,
it's only built, it's destroyed when it's done. For me, that's something for speculators, and like I have no problem either of it being the first appearance. But while we're talking about this, if somebody first appears in Marvel Age or in a house ad, that's not their first appearance, guys. Can we just get over this?
Really?
Yeah, this has become a thing. Like the Marvel Age X-Force preview issue's gone up. People are like, it's the real first Cable. Or like Malibu Sun with the Spawn, covering Spawn. They're like, this is the real first Spawn. I'm like, I get why it might be worth more, like the Marvel Age, but in any meaningful sense of the term, this isn't really a first appearance. People like Wolverine was in a house ad before Hulk 180 and 181, so now people are like, it's got the Wolverine house ad. It says real first appearance. And I think it's just people trying to split hairs because they can't really afford the real thing in some cases. And in some cases, I just think it's guys, and I don't know who, but I think it's comic book stores, probably ones who have a large backstock, trying to invent new ways to sell things. That's how I think the newsstand thing came about. I don't think anybody cared about newsstand versus direct copies until 2005 or something. Unless there was a significant difference, like you had a Batman 500 had like a gimmick cover and then the newsstand edition didn't or whatever.
Yeah, the first time I actually heard of something like that was there was an eBay posting of the first appearance of The Walking Dead in a previews magazine.
Another one. Which, again, I get why that previews would be worth something. And it may even be worth a significant amount. But don't try and sell me that this is somehow The Walking Dead's first appearance. Define what an appearance is. An appearance would have to be them actually doing something, not some fluff piece about how great this is going to be. And you can get it right here at Dime. It'll be on the shelves August 14th, 2004, $195. How is that a first appearance?
Gen 13... even though I wasn't like on the initial bandwagon afterwards, though, you couldn't miss them. I mean, they were crossing over with so many properties at the time. Later on, later on down the with Batman. Did they really?
They did not, but almost did.
They almost did.
J. Scott Campbell actually leaves the book to draw it, and then it just doesn't happen for whatever reason.
Oh, no kidding.
I don't remember. I think part of it was, I'm trying to remember the article I read about it. They wanted like grunge and Freefall to wind up in the Batmobile driving it and stuff. They wanted silly things that would fit Gen 13 that the Batman people just didn't want to do at the time.
I got you. All right.
Which now would not be a problem and really shouldn't have been a problem then because, hey, guys, it's comic books. Part of the word is comic. Let's have a little fun.
Was this when Denny O'Neil was running the Bat Office?
Yeah, it would have been with Denny O'Neil. He took that office very seriously in a way that might have been necessary to an extent, but also could be detrimental in cases like this. I think they lose out on a little whimsy here and there, and that's one of them. But yeah, Gen 13 crossed over with everybody. Mm-hmm. They were hot for so long. I remember Gen 13 #1 was one of those like $50 books forever. Now I think it's like 10. I don't think it costs you anything now.
Yeah. Darry, how about you? Early memories of Gen 13?
I did not pick the books up off the shelf in 94, 95.
You probably weren't old enough to yet, little boy. Look at these books.
I definitely did not have the homage swimsuit cover, which they mention in the letters pages of this miniseries. But I got the trade paperback of the series when it came out from, I think it was called Entertainment Earth, one of those companies that advertised in the comics. I was so excited to get that, and I read the whole thing, and I still have it to this day. I liked Gen 13 when it came out. I agree with what Dean said. I don't understand why they can't make this work. Even when DC tried its most recent attempt to bring the Wildstorm characters back, all they did was throw a version of Fairchild onto the Wildcats team.
Right, like now Gen 13 is Fairchild for the most part.
Yeah. It's a shame because there's a lot going on here, and it's very much of the moment. As Dean said, this was a book intended for the people who are the same age as the characters. You can't say that about a lot of the stuff coming out then or now. I really don't have a lot of bad stuff to say about Gen 13. It's very much a product of its time. Campbell, or however you pronounce it, very shortly after this book would come out, he would be everywhere. He'd be a legitimate superstar, and that would continue for a very long time. And that starts right here. So I thought that was really interesting to see even today, he's got big booths at conventions, such a household name to kind of their genesis, which I
was reading a little bit about his career and how he got started on the wiki, which was really neat to learn that he was showing stuff off in the 93 Comic-Con, and Jim Lee's he calls him shortly thereafter after seeing some of the stuff and asks him to come down and work with him in San Diego. This guy, honestly, when you look at what he did on Mike's Amazing World of Comics, I mean, it's like Deathmate Black, and he hits the ground running. And it's Gen 13, and for an artist to get this kind of a shot and really knock it out of the park with some characters and people accepting this new book. Of course, this is 94. This is Image. If Jim Lee's throwing it out there under Wildstorm, I'm sure it's catching a lot of eyes. But regardless,
yeah, you would think so. But when it got resolicited, it the first solicitation orders were 500,000. When it got resolicited, it was 170.
Oh, dropped! Wow,
dropped big. Well, I mean, there was a 7-month period, and that's why I said one of the important things about Gen 13 is in some ways it's the first hot book after the speculator bust. Because that's the thing, this went way down, and 175,000 is still it would be a ton now, you know what I mean? Right. But at the time that was seen, it was a very, very precipitous drop. A lot of people who wanted it couldn't get it, but it was, you're right, it was super hot when it came, but the bust happened, the first wave of the bust happened to that interim, and you can really see the impact of it. Even now, can you imagine what the orders would be if Jim Lee wasn't associated with it? It would gone down from 400,000 or 500,000 to 175. I mean, it would gone from 300 to 50, right? 400, it would have been close,
right? How do you feel, Darry, about if I threw the characters at you, you gave us kind of a description of who they were?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I could absolutely do that.
Could you do that? All right. Well, let's start with Caitlin Fairchild.
Caitlin Fairchild is the breakout character and the one you see on all of the covers this period of time. She is the 6-foot-something redhead, and she was kind of an inversion, which I liked. She was drawn to be very attractive, but the whole thing is that she's a mousy, brilliant, shy young woman who, when she gets her superpower, it's almost like a Captain Marvel thing where she turns into this statuesque one. She basically turns into Wonder Woman. It's that type of story where Caitlin Fairchild's a Steve Rogers, and then when she gets her power, she turns into Wonder Woman. They do a lot of awkward stuff with that. She's not used to walking around in a 6-foot whatever type body, but she's still the brains of the team. She's an incredibly foreboding presence. They envisioned her as being as strong as She-Hulk. So she's a player, but at the same time, she's the only one who can think stuff through, because everyone else on the team is your dumber, simpler teenager, where she was nope, I was a freshman at Princeton. I was ready to have my entire life ahead of me, and now I got to deal with this nonsense. One of the things I like about her is instead of just abandoning all these reprobates to their own shenanigans and going back and having a fine life, she's no, I'm going to watch out for them. I'm going to make sure that no one continues to take advantage of them. She's great. Unfortunately, during this series, she is at the tail end of some questionable art choices. I know that at the time things were very different, and I understand that. It's just reading this, I was some of this is...
Yeah, it could be definitely problematic nowadays.
It's not
this in particular might be problematic now. Whatever the equivalent is now, it exists. There are still young men and young women being incredibly lewd with one another. There are still young men and young women making off-color jokes when somebody winds up bent in front of them or on their knees around them. I refuse to believe that teenagers and young people have changed that much. So you might have to change some of the trappings, but the core you could probably keep. I don't know. Maybe they'd say something about Riz or what the fuck ever. It sounded like I was docking modern slang, and I'm not. I don't have a problem with it. But I'm sure you could, if you had somebody who was more in tune which, modern sensibilities, you could keep some of the risque humor. It would just have to be modernized, whatever that would look like for the appropriate audience now.
Yeah, and again, they
teenagers should be hypersexualized on some level. Not their bodies, necessarily, that sounds creepy, but how they act. Like, when I was a teenager, I made all kinds of dick jokes I wouldn't make now. Right. Now when I watch, like, you're not a wrestling guy, Darry, but Jesse is. When you watch some of that Attitude Era stuff, now you're cringy, man. You're like, God,
dude.
Man, I wish we had pointed at my dick less in 1999. You know what I mean? So, like, I don't want to say, like, oh, man, teenagers, drool. But I do think that if you have a group of teenage guys and girls together, and especially when, like, apparently they're the apex of physical perfection, they're going to be here and they have these powers, all kinds of things, hormones, new situations racing through them. If one of them's not off color, risque, just downright rude and crude, I don't know if they're really teenagers.
You ain't going to buy it. I get you.
But y'all are right. It would have to be modernized. It couldn't be exactly the same. Although I think it's always going to be funny when a dude falls over and, like, lands on a lady and looks to his right and, like, her tits are there. Probably always going to be funny.
I just like the fact that when it comes to Fairchild, they play it off as an excuse to build her character. So, like, either she's awkward with the new frame, or she's not exactly picking up on everything because they repeatedly point out, like, she's never had a date in her life or anything like that.
And that's ridiculous. She's a smoke show when they first draw her. So that's the problem here. J. Scott Campbell can't draw an ugly lady. So when you see her, she winds up being like 6'7" or 6'8". But when you first see her, she's like 6 feet tall. She looks hot. She got red hair, these big glasses. I've never had a date. No guy's ever talked to me. I don't buy that. You're super hot. I'd have talked to you, and I'd have said lewd comments to you in the 90s, right? But no, I do think it's mostly, it's not his fault. Like I said, it's not really their fault. It's just that he's incapable of drawing an ugly woman, which, as we know, because that's what he does for a living now. And he's one of the 3 guys from the 90s. Him, Adam Hughes, and Joseph Michael Linsner have made a living drawing hot ladies. And they all draw different hot ladies, but they've made a living drawing hot ladies too.
Joseph Michael Linsner. Oh,
super nice guy. Love the guy.
He's great.
All right. But that's what he did. And Cry for Dawn. Dawn is a lot different sexy than Fairchild than Ghost. But they've all made a living drawing sexy ladies for 30 years now.
That's right.
It's true.
All right. Let's see who's going to be next here. We'll just go.
I don't mean that's good for them in an industry where people get chewed up and spit out. They found a niche, and 30 years later, they're still going. So I want to make sure I got across what it actually was. Not like, ha, thank God the sexy ladies are still there. I wasn't trying to sound like that.
All right, next up we'll go with Roxy Spalding, Freefall.
Roxy. Well, she likes to smoke. I don't know if you guys picked on that. It's a very subtle character trait, which I like because I feel like in the 90s, a lot more teenagers did smoke. And, comics, especially.
Bro, when I went to Upward Bound my first year, a federal program to stay, like, for the summer, like, and I stayed 6 weeks on college campus. My first year, you could get smoking permission. If your parents would sign off that you could smoke, they would let you smoke. My parents signed off on mine. I didn't smoke cigarettes. I've never really smoked cigarettes. That's how ubiquitous smoking was then, that a federal government would let a 16-year-old smoke at their program, as long as their mom said it was fine.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
And that was 1994. That's the last year of it. But that's still really, really late.
Mm-hmm.
Go on about Freefall, the bad girl.
Yeah, I like her because her powers involve manipulation of gravity, but she doesn't really know how to control them. They always get to draw her in these floating poses, like she'll float in the background. She'll seem very of the air as opposed to very Earth Fairchild or grunge. It's good visual cues to distinguish everyone. It's another thing that Campbell really brought to it. I don't know if it was something he worked out with Jim Lee in advance, but none of the characters look alike. They're all incredibly distinct, which I feel is something that Campbell's very good at. Later on in Danger Girl, all those characters, even if you don't know their names. Freefall is the wild card, as Dean mentioned. They talk about this on the letters page. I guess she was like a hodgepodge of, one of them had a name they really liked, and one of them had a design they really liked, and one of them was like, well, there needs to be 2 girls and 2 guys in this book, so that's it. That's Freefall. She doesn't really get a lot of character development over this series, but you can see how she's the foil to everyone else in the group, because she's not particularly put off by any of this. In either the one half or the zero, she actually does save the day by lighting a cigarette and blowing something up.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Hey, smoking's cool, kids. Sorry, kids. I like Freefall a lot, but one of the funny things about it is, like, grunge And it appears they're boyfriend, girlfriend, it seems, right? Or they will be.
I don't know what happens later, but I feel like she's interested in grunge at some point, and he's kind of like not. But then we get into some of the later issues.
Playing cool.
Okay,
like, remember where it's like, it's always funny because he's always like, this hot lady, oh my God, pretty ladies. I'm like, Freefall's a smoke show, right? Like literally a smoke show. She is smoking right now. So it's always funny when I see guys who have a hot significant other, but then like lust after ladies, like the guy on Modern Family who's married to Julia Bowen, who's always scoping ladies. Like, bro, what are we doing? Oh man, finally a hot lady, bro. Calm down, grunge.
She's so mean to him, though.
Grunge grows up to be that guy. That's canonical. Grunge grows up to be the guy.
Him? Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's why he's so stupid later.
That's the book I want DC to do, is I want them to show what Gen 13 are in their 40s and 50s. Like, that's what I want to see, because every member of Gen X that I know hates their life. So I want to see these 5 characters in their 40s and 50s in the modern DC universe. I want to see grunge with, 3 kids he has no relationship with. I want to see, and they all live in the Pacific Northwest, or at least they have an adventure up there. I would read that book.
I don't want it to be sad like you just described, but I would read that book. No. They should call it Images of Tomorrow if they could get away with it.
That's nice. I don't mean sad.
Local Man's doing an Images of Tomorrow issue now. So
are they fucking doing? Oh my gosh, man! I got to read that book. Man.
It's the best book. It's the best book that's not Transformers that's coming out right now.
Transformers is really good too. Yeah. Blood Squad 7's been really good lately, and Shazam. Any of these comics are available at sbcomics.com. Speeding Bullet Comics going to take care of you. Matthew Price, Rachel Price, Dan, they're all down there ready to help. Look them up on Facebook, sbcomics.com. If you're in Norman, stop by. They've got some Local Man issues. They'll sell them to you. And from what I understand, if you have $2 million, they will find you any issue of Supreme you like. Rob Liefeld Supreme. Supreme The Return, number 16, 27, whichever one you want for $2 million. Now, they have some Supremes that aren't $2 million, but if you bring $2 million in, they'll find any issue.
Bring it to the table. I'm sure they'll do it. Sure.
Any issue of Supreme you want. The ash can, whatever.
We can find it. $2 million. Oh, it's great stuff. All right, Darry, how about grunge? We were talking about Roxy. Let's talk about grunge.
Yeah, grunge. I think in this one, they don't give him a first name. I think they make a joke out of it, but I know his name is Bernard. That from later on.
I guess you better know karate if your name's Bernard. Like, you better know karate. You better be Bernard Shaw from CNN, because otherwise it's over for you, sir.
I guess he's Asian. That always confused me when I was a kid.
I think he's supposed to be Asian. I should have looked up the characters more in depth, but they do.
Yeah, I was going to say it's in the Zero issue.
He gets confronted by someone.
That's right. In the Zero issue, he's like a triad hitman or whatever. But
he said
I should have read. When we should do this sometime for a thing is like Wildstorm put out like several like source book profile things. Yeah. We should pick a few sometime and do them. Be like, my favorite one. The problem is they like to print into small print on brightly colored backgrounds. And I'm old, I can't read it. Vision is the worst offender of that. Marvel Vision never let a weird typecast or weird background go by. Would you like to read about Heroes Reborn? Sorry.
Not happening.
We wrote this article specifically so you can't read it. I love Marvel Vision. Don't get me wrong.
That actually might have been on purpose, having been there for Heroes Reborn. I'm just saying. I could see someone in the ad department being like, "There's nothing here. Just make the background so they can't read it." It's like, who's going to quiz you on that? Did you read the article on Marvel Heroes Reborn? No, I just know that Jim Lee and Rob Liefeld are doing it. Okay, great. It's like,
perfect.
You're through the door before you realize no one has any plan whatsoever. Grunge is great because he continues the classic tradition of, we have a name. We're not 100% sure what it means. We're giving it to this character. His power is, he has the classic ability to, the Absorbing Man power set, where anything he touches, he can become that. Campbell's very good at playing with the visuals. So at one point he touches a piece of cybernetic armor and grows a metal arm. He doesn't just get the Colossus sheath. His body takes on the form. The powers are visually interesting. He's always drawn very low to the ground, makes all the jokes and the humor, and he's kind of the dumb one, but it works to counteract with everyone else. Everyone's got their own unique spin. It's like the way the Ninja Turtles are set up. You know their attributes as soon as you hear their names. I think this was really good here. He's the kind of down-to-earth, dopey one, but he's also very much the heart of the team. He gets his own stories later. And then rounding out the original 4 is Burnout. I'm going to be honest with you. There's nothing here for that character. I don't even know his real name. I know later on, spoilers for a 30-year-old comic book, he's revealed to be Lynch's son.
Oh, okay. There's little hints here that like
right at the beginning
that like he might, that not necessarily that he might be Lynch's son, but that Lynch has a son and Burnout can't find his parents. There's foreshadowing, but not enough for you to put it together, which is the right thing. You don't want anybody to figure this out too soon. Yeah. I felt like Burnout was like, even though later we find out that like he hated being at home, he was on the basketball team, he was on the baseball team, and he wasn't the bully jock, but he wasn't necessarily a nice guy either. He had a short temper.
He exists in the in-between because he's got the Johnny Storm power set, and there are a lot of visuals that they take from that character, which is fine. They put their own unique spin on it, but he's not that like dope, all those attributes, they go to grunge.
He doesn't have a single hot rod.
No, he doesn't, and it's unfortunate. He just kind of stands in the background.
Let me ask you about his powers, and this is a greater question about superpowers in general. But why does every person who like flames up fly?
Because it looks cool.
That's it. But like, it's funny. They're like, it's just funny that you think you're like, okay, well, this guy turns into flame. Guess he flies too. Like Firestar flies, and both the Human Torches fly, and Sunfire flies, and I'm sure there's other ones that I could come up with. Firestorm's not a fire guy, but his head's on fire, and he flies. Mm-hmm. It just seems like if you're fiery, you fly. Except Pyro, who doesn't really do fire stuff, he just controls existing fire stuff.
Yeah,
true.
I always go back to, especially in the golden age, it's that rule of cool. Like, what looks the best, right? I got a guy who's on fire. Okay, I got a guy who's on fire who can fly. It just makes sense because then you get the trail of the fire. You get things they can do. You get all these shapes. These poor artists going back to the 30s, they're in front of a drawing board for like 12 hours a day. They want to draw something that's interesting. And if you get a guy who's on fire, you could do more stuff if he's not retained to the ground. Is there a scientific reason?
No, there's no scientific reason. And it's funny to watch this happen. When I created heroes, when I was around this time and I would make them up, my fire guys flew because fire guys fly.
I gotta say, I was always a fan of the idea of if you get superpowers, you gotta have a flight or flight equivalent type thing, because that is boring if you don't. Like Spider-Man and Batman, they swing on their ropes. They're always falling off things or swinging on things. They have capes and webbing, visually dynamic stuff. If you're going to be a traditional superhero, you need a way of movement. Even the very first Superman, who couldn't fly, he could still leap. So they could use his cape to show that he was moving things. You got to have a visually interesting way of moving around. If half of my characters can fly for some reason, fine, go with it. The only one who can pull it off is probably Frank Castle, who is drawn very dramatically, standing on top of rooftops and alleyways. But even Wolverine, think about your favorite Wolverine shots. It's probably him leaping dramatically from an animal pose or hunched over, like falling.
I was just gonna say without flying is all I meant. He had Frank Castle. I was like, well, you have Wolverine too, who he gets two of them, like you're saying. He's either flying through the air because he jumped off something or Colossus threw him. Or he gets the one where he's like, I'm real quiet in the leaves and no one knows I'm here.
Exactly. And
I'm about to Sam Keith this guy.
And then about halfway through this book, we get Sarah Rainmaker, who is a Native American, but a big deal later on would be that she was revealed to be a lesbian, which I just remember being a huge deal at the time. I was a child. I had no idea why or what was going on, but I knew Wizard made plenty of jokes at her expense.
We were not very kind to gay people at the beginning of acceptance. No. I remember in the 90s, the big thing was like, I'm not gay. I don't care if you are, but I'm not gay.
Yeah.
And it was this weird thing where you'd still make fun of gay people. Sadly, I engaged in a lot of this. I was not claiming to sit here to be, fucking pious human rights campaign Compton over here or something. But
that's what I have you in my phone as.
Right. But It was, sadly, that's the start of things. Usually that's how acceptance and things start. Like, you start with like, okay, that's fine, but it's still weird. And by
it's important to normalize it, right? Started to normalize it. This was one of the first places that, I'm like a fat little kid. I don't know what's going on. I don't have any gay friends. No one talks about this. And I'm starting to see it here. And I'm like, well, what is that? And then by the time you figure out what's going on, you're like, at least me, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. By the time I was in high school, there were dozens of gay characters, and now there are hundreds, which is great. But it all had to start somewhere. It made sense to start at a third party that wasn't worried about, I don't know what the hell the big two are worried about when it comes to this stuff. 30 years ago, Homage and Image, they could get away with this stuff. Where it was like, yeah, fine, she's gay, great. Move on to the next thing. And if it sells, we'll keep doing it. If it doesn't sell, we'll cancel it. It's as simple as that. But again, there's not too much to her. She's got the same powers as Storm. She's very interested in her tribe and her heritage. She's one of the first instances where they really build up. This is the thing that for me sells Gen 13 and makes it unique from everyone else. They have one of the best origin stories ever. All your parents were super soldiers. They got screwed over by the deepest black book, black ops, federal government, Weapon X type thing. And you guys had no idea, and now we're coming for you. And only this Nick Fury knockoff is going to prevent you guys from being super soldiers. And I just think that's great. It immediately gives them someone to fight against. It gives them very hopeless odds. It's like the inversion of every other team of superheroes who are all like, oh, hey, are we going to be good enough to be whatever? And here it's like, no, my dad might be in Stormwatch, and he might be crazy, and he might have killed a bunch of people. I don't really want to do that. So I'm going to play this out and see if I can be a normal person. Gen 13 it has a lot of potential. Whether or not that's fully realized at the time is arguable, but the potential is certainly there from day one.
Speaking of Stormwatch, I remember Rainmaker first appeared in Stormwatch, if I recall correctly. Stormwatch number 8 with Ripclaw. I remember having the issue. But when I looked it up, I saw different answers about when she first appeared. And I couldn't get to the bottom of this one like I did the Gen 13 Deathmate Black thing like I did for y'all. But so if anybody out there's got like the proper answer, I saw that this is her first appearance, but also that Stormwatch 8 was her first appearance.
You said Ripclaw. Are her and Ripclaw supposed to be from the same tribe or nation?
The Apache as well?
He is a Native American. I have no idea which nation he is from.
Apache.
Okay.
I know there was interplay. The reason they were getting together is because they were both Native Americans in that issue.
Okay.
I just want to know.
That's cool. It makes sense because if you look at all the marketing material for Gen X and Gen 13, she's not there. It was clearly supposed to be just a 4-person team. And then halfway through this, she shows up randomly and then suddenly she's part of the team and it's 5 and 6 by the ends. It wouldn't surprise me if they were all sitting around the studio offices and being like, we need another one. I got this cool one over here. I got no plans for her. Yeah, throw her in there, see what happens. She's a kid.
It makes it feel more real.
Yeah.
My voice is cracked, speaking of more real teen-wise. It makes it more real because teens pick up friends. And all of a sudden, somebody will be in your group who wasn't for happenstance. You're like, everybody on this field trip's got to have 6 people. So you and your 4 friends are in one, and here's, Rebecca Langston, and she doesn't have Rebecca Langston's here. By the end of the day, she's part of your group.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Also, we have to talk about the best member of Gen 13 who just keeps showing up in all the things we read. Pitt.
Oh, my gosh, I love Pitt.
Why was Pitt in this book?
I love it.
No reason other than that he's cool. The same reason he was in Cyberforce. Probably the same reason he's in the Max. Not only was he cool, but he was a hot character. And Dale Keown was busy either with his guitar or his piss jar. Who fucking knows? And so he wasn't drawing. He was too busy, but he was a hot character. So people wanted to use him. And, let's goose the sales. We goose them a little bit. We goose them.
Could you imagine you pick this up off the rack, you have no idea what's going on, and randomly in the middle, a giant alien who looks like the Hulk shows up talking about other aliens, and then it's never mentioned again.
Grab the kid, go home.
He's just like, those teenagers are great warriors. They'll deal with it. He's more of an asshole here than he normally is, it seemed like, too. Like, I don't know what's transpired.
It was all about getting in the fight. I guarantee it. I mean, that's got to be what it was. I think they probably had to
you get to do a She-Hulk fight without having Hulk.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a good fight,
I like that, too.
That power, that like gorilla press slam is like is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
I like that, too, because these kids were going to be made into weapons. Child soldiers, assets, not the Cold War was over at this point, but they were going to help us defeat whatever our next batch of enemies happened to be in 1994. Every adult they come across, like every Black Razor and IO armored operative is a dick. They slap the kids around, treat them with no respect, hold guns to their head. Like there's no attempt to lure them in and say, listen, you had a rough life, but there's something incredibly special about you. And we want to maximize that potential, right? If you think about every Captain America origin story is always the same way. It's like they're straight with him and they're like, we are going to put you through some awful stuff, but if it works, you're going to help a lot of people. No one does that here. No. You do what we tell you when we tell you, and if you don't, we're going to kill you, and there's 6 more waiting behind you. I like that Pitt is used to reinforce that because he's incredibly powerful, but he is a dick to them. Part of that might be out of character, but part of that is he's only here to save Timmy, who was caught up in the Gen 13 program. So I like that they're looking around and seeing all these awful people who abuse the power that they've been given. And eventually at the end of the book, they decide, no, we don't want to be that. We want to be the exact opposite of that. And we're going to make sure that we stick together and we protect each other and we don't do that. Every time they get caught up in a Wildstorm crossover, they got about 5-6 years before DC buys them. Dean mentioned Divine Right before. That's one they feature prominently. A compliment to Stormwatch, who are very much the establishment, and the Wildcats, who are all like old soldiers who were fighting a threat no one believes in. And then you have Gen 13, who's like, we're going to be the heroes of tomorrow. What are we going to learn from you old bastards and all your miserable experiences? Mm-hmm. So I thought
they also get to meet Generation X, so watch out for that.
They meet Generation X. We mentioned
There's 2 crossovers, right? Both of them did one.
Yep, they did the flip thing. But you mentioned before they do a lot of crossovers. The one I like the most is the Superman one, and I very rarely say anything good about a Superman comic, but they had a nice one where Fairchild.
Well, you should listen to the podcast, Darry, because when Matthew Price and I were talking about great Superman stuff.
There must be good Superman stuff out there.
I mean, the 90s are arguably one of the greatest creative eras for Superman ever. You know, like from like 91 to 97, the book's firing on all cylinders. It's a weekly comic that works great. I know you're like, I don't care. I'm busy with Wildcats. I'm busy with Cyberforce.
It's not that I don't care.
To this day, when will Voodoo fight Cyblade? I know what you're about.
91 to 97, they kill him. Right, because they want the Jim Lee X-Men sales, right?
That's not
all right, fine. By 97, he's electric blue. And in the middle, he's got the worst haircut of any fictional character of all time.
Come on. There's so many worse haircuts.
But you didn't say you disagreed with me that it was a bad one. You just said there were worse ones. You proved my point.
I mean, I don't really care about it one way or another.
I'm just saying. It's funny that you said 91 to 97 because I always think of like that's the worst period of time to have been a Superman fan because he's jumping from one gimmick to the next.
The weekly ride, and your writers are like Dan Jurgens, Louis Simonson, Roger Stern. You've got Jurgens on pencils. You've got John Bogdanovo on pencils. There's a great guy. Your favorite Jerry Ordway doing some writing and pencils. So on outside looking in, I can see that. But when you read it, it is wildly good. The sporting cast is treated well. It's really they really do a great job. You should listen to some of these podcasts time and time again. Panic in the Sky. Good stuff, man. There's good stuff for you. The Coming of the Krypton Man.
Oh.
That one I actually don't know. But yeah, I will agree that
the death thing came because they wanted to marry Lois and Clark, but then the TV show was coming and they're like, we want to match up when they do it. But we got to do something else for the yearly focus now. Jerry Ordway always said in their meetings, let's kill him.
Yeah.
And he said it again, like, okay, well, what would that look like? And they went with it. I'm sure they wanted sales to go, but I don't think they were like, yes, we're going to get those X-Men sales. I don't think they could have foreseen that.
You don't think anyone up above editorial publisher was calling them up and saying, this X-Men book sold 1.5 million. Is that something we can do? What do you guys have to do to match those sales? And then
that's not the way they tell the story.
Okay,
and
all right.
The way it's told usually is Paul Levitt's insulated DC from stuff like that. And you'll see a lot more stuff like that later. But then Paul Levitt's was able to explain to these people, why don't we have a comic that sold 8 million? It's like, well, it's kind of a stunt. Do you want us to do a stunt? And DC also had Warner Books, and they were working together. This is about the time they're getting the Sandman stuff in there. Yeah. So they also liked being seen as the publisher that had that highbrow stuff. And so they wanted to go more for that. But I don't think anybody was like, man, I hope this tanks. I hope we don't sell any comics. But I don't think anybody was like, this will take the world by storm. That's the story they tell anyway. If other evidence comes up, I'll be happy. I will recant. But I've studied this immensely, and there's no evidence to believe anything other than what they say.
Yeah.
We got a conspiracy theorist here. He's like the CEO of Warner, showed up that day with the hatchet. Mike Carlin. He hated Mike Carlin. And Mike Carlin's like, what do you want me to do with this? He's like, kill the big blue man. I just a green hatchet like it's kryptonite.
As an X-Men fan and as someone who never liked Superman, I just like telling people they had to kill him and didn't come close to the sales on X-Men 1. Now, that is just me being mean for the sake of, I do like being able to say that out loud. So,
oh, man.
You're 100% right, though. I mean, you can say that out loud, and there's a lot of truth to it. You know, I mean, like, X-Men #1 didn't get half the media attention that Superman 75 and that whole thing got. And you're right, that particular issue didn't come close, you know, to selling what X-Men 1 did. But it led to a lot, but X-Men drops off precipitously, especially as Jim Lee goes. They had solid sales for about a year, especially in comparison to what they had. Yeah. At the same time, you're right. It's just a testament to how large a cultural phenomenon the X-Men were in the 90s, which is why you have Gen 13. This is like the New Mutants, right? Or it's the original X-Men, the original 5. It's a lot of New Mutants feel here.
Actually, it's funny you say that because that is the thought I had when I was reading this. I may have mentioned this before, but I'm a huge fan of the character of John Lynch, who's in this, who's like Wildstorm's knockoff Nick Fury. I love him. I think he's a great character. He's got a lot of really good stories by celebrated creators coming after this. So I really did like the idea that it was older mentor figure and 5 superpowered teenagers, because that is the first version of the X-Men. But that was also a gimmick that Kirby would use going back to the 40s. You know, he had like half a dozen books that was that same formula of like
Boy Commandos, Newsboy Legion,
Boys Ranch.
Yeah.
Exactly. And he would revisit it again later on with the Forever People and a bunch of other stuff. So it was something he kept going back to. The X-Men technically fits that mold. I did like that use here. Lynch isn't telling them the full story. He's trying to figure out if one of these is his kid or whatnot. I thought that was a good dynamic. They used a dynamic that wasn't in the public consciousness at the time, because there wasn't really a book where Professor X was leading a bunch of teenagers. Everyone was an adult, including New Mutants had become X-Force. But it was
even now New Warriors, there's nobody leading them. They're hanging out at the crash pad, figuring out their own way.
But even that was like Night Thrasher and 5 brand new Spider-Man.
I mean, once the Cord stuff happens, there's really no old person to guide anybody. Yeah. This is a reinvention, a reinversion of that formula that was not happening at the time. So even in the preeminent teen book.
Yeah, exactly. It's solid. You have the foundation that you can build on. And plus, they're a West Coast team. They settle in San Diego. They're in the same place that Homage Studios is going to be. You know, they're different. You know, they're different visuals than everything else. So it's a really solid first mini series, and especially knowing how successful Campbell's going to be, it's a pleasure to revisit.
Mm-hmm. I was looking at all of the crossovers that Gen 13 had. You started talking about Superman Gen 13 as being one of your favorites.
I thought that was a great premise. I remember when it came out, there was a lot of synergy to try to get Wildstorm and DC to cross over and promote each other's brands, very similar to the way Marvel treated Malibu for a hot second before they retired the whole thing. That one was great because I remember seeing Fairchild had a very unique silhouette in the Supergirl costume. And it was, you know, and this was a period of time where Supergirl was a very complex character. The famous Silver Age one wasn't in the book. There were clones and a bunch of nonsense. Angels and all that stuff running around. So to see Fairchild,
I'm not a Peter David guy, and that's one of the reasons why.
I gotta say I got a soft spot for the aforementioned Roger Stern's Matrix Supergirl. I thought she was a good way of reintroducing the character while being unique in her own right. She was very much a product of her time. I never was sold on the Peter David Angel thing.
Why? That is a big barrel of why. Are you just not creative enough to use this great character as it was? Go on about Fairchild, though. I'll bag on Peter David anytime.
I don't want to bag on Peter David because I know he's very sick.
I don't really want to really badly. It's just funny.
No, I know. I feel bad. I got a lot of nostalgia for Peter David because he was writing so many of the books that I picked up when I was just starting out as a fan. So I always go back to him. But that debate he had with Todd McFarlane, it's like, whew, good Lord.
Oh, boy.
It's tough being your fan as an adult, I can tell you that. Not Todd. I love Todd. Anyway, Jesse, do we need a synopsis or something?
No, first off, there's going to be a lot of stuff you guys do not have to say again because you touched on a lot of the high points of this book. I'll go through the first three. We'll stop, talk a little bit, do the last two, and then I'll do the last two of the miniseries, and then the last two of the actual coverage we're doing here. If you guys are ready. All right, well, we start out our first issue in 1979. Young siblings Matt and Nicole flee with their parents from pursuing soldiers. When their mother is shot, their father uses his powers to neutralize the enemy ship, tearfully begging Matt to protect Nicole before being killed in front of his horrified children. Fast forward to 1994 in Princeton, New Jersey. Caitlin Fairchild finishes her sophomore year of college. Her roommate Alexa informs her that government officials have been looking for her. That night, the National Security Committee offers Caitlin a spot in the Gen 13 program, insisting she comes with them immediately. In Washington, D.C., Jack or John, we are all in agreement here. It's John, right? John Lynch?
Jack is a nickname for John.
That sounds fine to me. Okay. John Lynch questions.
Why, though? Why do you have it? That's something I've always wondered with John Kennedy and Jack. Jesse's upset with me now.
No. I completely agree 100%. You don't go around calling John Jack.
But they did with John F. Kennedy. But like, why? It's not shorter. Where did this come from? I asked Emily about this a few weeks ago. We talked about it. Like, I have no fucking idea.
Does anyone know anyone in the British aristocracy? Because I feel like this is where that, if anyone out there is listening as part of the House of Lords, let us know.
No, don't actually.
Okay.
Don't. I don't want to hear from some aristocratic nonsense motherfucker. You come down here and get your hands dirty, then you talk to me.
That's the thing I knew.
Tell me, I'd really like to know.
Lord John Smith has worked for you.
I thought she was calling him Jack to annoy him because he's just known as John Lynch in so many other books. Think about it. You're working with someone, right? At the end of the day, Black Ops is the same bureaucracy that every company has. They're not the people out in the field. They're the middle managers, right? John Lynch, Ivana Bayul, and Miles Craven they call themselves the Triumvirate. They're the three generic people who run IO, which is the dirty version of S.H.I.E.L.D. that exists in Wildstorm. So they're co-workers, and she wants to annoy him because she knows she's getting away with something he wouldn't approve of. And at the end of the day, he's a terrifying mystery man who was once on Team 7 and has killed everything. She knows not to push him too far, but she knows she can get away with calling him Jack, which is probably something that no one else could get away with doing. So at the end, when he steals her child soldiers and ruins her entire day, it's like, well, you shouldn't have called me Jack on top of everything else you did. Like, that's how I read it. So
I'm perfectly fine with your explanation. The problem is if you're writing a comic book, you don't start calling the guy Jack when his actual name is John. It doesn't come up that his name is John Lynch until issue 0, I believe. At that point, he's introduced as John. So that's why I think they thought they were going to call this dude Jack Lynch, unless this dude hasn't appeared anywhere else prior to this.
He predates Gen 13.
Are you serious? Because if you are...
No, he was a character.
He
was a character in Deathblood.
He's in Deathblood. Okay, help me out.
Let's all take a step back. I mentioned this the last time we talked about the Wildcats. Jim Lee is very good at this, and he wanted the Wildstorm universe to feel very lived in. So at some point, he and whatever artist or writer he was working with developed Team 7. The gimmick here is during the Vietnam conflict, there were a bunch of great special forces soldiers.
Punishers.
Basically Frank Castle clones. They were all experimented on. They all got superpowers. They are the impetus for most of the characters in the Wildstorm universe. They were Team 7. One of them is the Grifter. One of them is Deathblow. One of them is John Lynch. One of them is Backlash. John Lynch was a supporting character in Deathblow because, again, John Lynch got his eyes scratched out. He runs IO. He's your knockoff Nick Fury. He's the character you need if you're going to do a story about how awful and terrifying Black Ops people with unlimited budgets can be.
Especially when they have one eye.
Actually, this gave a pretty interesting origin to that. It almost looks as if he scratches his own eye out when he gets his psychic powers, which I thought was a really interesting compare and contrast with Nick Fury.
It would make sense. Think about it. If you all of a sudden had these psychic powers, it would probably hurt your brain, and so you'd be trying to scratch it. And you live in a world with Ripclaw and Warblade, so you're like, surely I can scratch my own brain.
We talked about this last time where the Grifter, when he starts out, he's got like a dozen generic superpowers that are only used a couple of times. This is why, because
too busy jump, kicking, blip, gunner. Oh my God, have you ever seen Street Fighter 2 or Tekken 3? That's what I do, but I've got guns. That sounds mocking, but I love it. Honestly, but that's what it is. He does a jump, kick, flip, and then he shoots somebody like 13 times. Oh man, can't believe I missed one. And like they'll have a cross in their head, right? You know, he's like, oh man.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Am I wrong, Jesse?
No, I love it.
Jealous that this isn't Cyberforce?
Well,
I think you're a little jealous.
We're working our way to this.
You're a little jealous.
Listen, if I'm not going to get Cyberforce in my Gen 13, I'm at least going to get something Cyberforce adjacent or another character that's appeared in Cyberforce, and that would be Pitt. And I'm perfectly fine with that.
Right.
So just to kind
I
of...
don't believe you.
Darry, when you were talking, I remembered him being in Deathblow. I remember seeing him in there, and that's why I was like, oh, yeah, this is John Lynch. I know who this is. Why is he calling him Jack? All right, I understand now. Thank you very much.
Want to know a funny story about Deathblow #1 that only happened to me?
Yes.
I did not steal it.
Oh, damn. I thought that's where this was going to start.
No, sorry. I bought this from the local comic book shop, and I remember getting home, and it had that black cover with, like, the red foil thing or whatever. And I got home and read it, and I was like, this is a fucking ripoff. I was like, there's only like 15 words in this thing. Nothing fucking happened.
Wow.
And I got my comic book store to take it back, and I was able to get something else.
Did you seriously?
I did. I took back Deathblow #1.
Wow.
I haven't read it. I haven't read it since then. It's probably better than I thought, but it was just Jim Lee jerking off like he was Frank Miller, right? Like, part of why it didn't grab me. You know, it's like also the art was, it's not like it was bad, but, you know, I mean, Sin City's also on the shelf, bud.
Needs to be a minimum number of words in my
But, like, I got the comic book store to take it back. I don't really like this, and she was nice enough to let me have it.
All right, back to it here. John Lynch in Washington, D.C. John Lynch questions a lady by the name of Ivana about using his Black Razor teams for Gen 13 security. Despite his concerns over the Gen 12 project's fate, Ivana reveals their current Gen 13 subjects, including a powerful individual codenamed Threshold, who turns out to be the grown-up Matt from the earlier mishap in 1979 that we were talking about.
What a jerk.
Oh, boy. And his sister, Threshold, brutally...
Honestly, that's the stuff you really have to take out.
It gets... Again, a bit inappropriate.
I know there's probably a focus on grunge making some off-color humor, but that's probably less of the problem and more where she's like, let's fuck, brother.
Yeah, within her second.
Yeah, like the first page you meet her, he's like, what if we aren't, brother? And just then we'd have sex. All right.
Pushing that on the
But I do like that.
Foreshadowed Brazzers, right? Like, that's all Brazzers is.
Foreshadowed Brazzers.
Just a fucking stepbrother, stepsister weird shit, right? So Gen 13, way ahead of their time. Way to go.
I like that the way to show the villains being really messed up people is that they have no normal ways of coping with anything, right? Bliss and Threshold were raised in this program from day one. They are the best case scenario of what the Gen 13 kids can hope for if the villains get what they want. Threshold is missing an eye for some reason. He blows up people's heads indiscriminately because he can. It's the only way he seems to feel anything. Bliss is just running around taking control of attractive people, making them do what she wants, but neither of them seem to be enjoying themselves. So I thought that was a really interesting way of showing like, these are messed up people. This is what our heroes are fighting against. So it's weird. It's awkward. It's very, very cringy. It actually gave me flashbacks to Jeff Loeb's Ultimates 3, which is a comic I would never recommend.
Oh, yeah, the Scarlet Witch Quicksilver shit. Yeah.
Just awful, awful stuff.
Honestly, I feel like in this case, it's more of what you're saying. In that case, it was Jeff Loeb just fucking around. He was just like, what can I do to make somebody feel sick? Like there was, no real explanation for it. He's just, he's just Jeff Loeb. Right. The same reason he had Red Hulk fight the Watcher, because he doesn't know what he's doing. He goes for something over the top and hopes people talk about it. And I guess he gets what he wants, because here we are fucking talking about it.
True.
Here we are.
True. Threshold brutally demonstrates his power.
Person, I should say that. He's probably nice.
Cheered on by his sister Nicole. The next day, Caitlin arrives at the Genesis facility, feeling uneasy. Jack asks Threshold to look out for his missing son, but Threshold only says he reports to Ivana. Caitlin meets fellow recruits Grunge, Roxy Spalding, and Bobby Lane. They undergo rigorous tests under the watchful eyes of Ivana, Nicole, and Threshold, who use drugs to try and trigger their latent powers. One night, Caitlin wakes up sick and accidentally demonstrates superhuman strength, growing nearly a foot taller. I mean, she got pretty tall. I don't know how tall. She got a lot taller.
I want to say she's like 6'7" or 6'8", right?
Yeah, she's huge.
This is why I should have looked at the source books. It has all the stats.
Yeah, true.
Provided the background doesn't suck.
She ends up accidentally hurting or knocking out a soldier who caught them in this it was like this computer room. Now, in issue 2, Caitlin leads Roxy, Grunge, Bobby, and new teammates Sarah Rainmaker and Tom Hallinan across the desert. They are trying to evade an enemy aircraft. Tom uses his powers to disable a ship. Bobby takes out another with his flames, and Caitlin hurls a rock at a third. When soldiers capture Grunge, Roxy, and Sarah unleashes a sandstorm, and Roxy discovers her powers, sending a soldier flying. Caitlin recalls their escape from the Genesis facility, aided by Tom, who reveals the dark purpose of the Gen 13 program. The captured soldier warns they won't escape, prompting Tom to kill him, which horrifies Caitlin. Tom's true identity is Threshold. He's revealed when he captures the team with Nicole's help. The next morning, Caitlin wakes from the... So, by the way, just to kind of put this out there, Caitlin does not go with him. Like, he's going to bring all the rest of them back. But Caitlin, I think, does she escape or does she just say, hey, I'm not going?
He doesn't bring her because it makes him think that she's weak. They don't need her anyway. Yeah. For somebody who throughout the book claims that he's so much smarter and better than them, this is an incredible tactical error. If you're supposed to secure an entire group of people, you secure the entire group. If one of them doesn't want to come with you, you better figure out how to make her. You know, I mean, right. That's a fucking job. That's a job, soldier! I wouldn't harp on him so much, but he spends so much time telling us how great he is while doing several really questionably dumb things.
Stupid things. Yeah. Right. The next morning, Caitlin wakes and has a vision of Threshold's betrayal and her friend's capture. So she decides to head back, finds the wreckage of one of the ships, grabs a gun. Now she's armed and she's determined to save them.
I got things to say about that.
Issue 3, Caitlin approaches the compound as the Black Razor team arrives, delivering a crate containing a powerful being. She infiltrates the facility, disguising herself in a Black Razor suit. Lynch expresses concern over Threshold's treatment of the recruits. Threshold taunts Grunge in a secure room, which, by the way, we got some... Yeah, we'll just say that they made sure that they don't have any clothes on. They're completely just out of their element, and they have them prisoner. Threshold taunts Grunge for not manifesting powers and attacks Roxy, prompting Grunge to transform and knock out Threshold. The team escapes their restraints. Caitlin finds a child named Timmy and plans to rescue him. Meanwhile, Nicole taunts a prisoner, not just any prisoner. It's the massive alien Pit. As Caitlin and Timmy attempt to escape, Nicole blasts them after she sees him out of the corner of her eye. But Timmy's cries awaken the alien. The prison's not going to hold him. He breaks free, pounding through the walls.
Yeah, he makes a comment like he was just doing this to get inside. Like, this is how he could find Timmy. They could never really capture Pit.
And then Pit and Caitlin clash because there's a bit of a misunderstanding as Caitlin believes that Pit is going
superheroes.
That's the way it works. Caitlin believes that Pit is going to hurt Timmy when in fact he's going over to try and save him. So they decide they start fighting. Caitlin proves her strength by overpowering Pit. That's a big deal. Despite voices urging peace, Pit prepares to continue the fight. Ivana watches the battle wreak havoc across the facility while Lynch orders his team to get ready to fire when Caitlin and Pit finally make their way into the control room that Ivana and John Lynch are standing in. So at the end of the issue, all guns are drawn, pointed on Caitlin and Pit. And that is where we end issue 3. So there you go. We open it up. We already talked about our characters, some of the fun things that happen here with Pit showing up. I'll just throw out a couple of my notes here. I don't think I've read this I knew about the characters. I'd never read the first issue. I think I own the Pit issue. I don't even know if I've read that up until now. But you guys hit the nail on the head. This is a great introduction to a team of kids that they seem like they're way out of their element. I never did give a lot of thought to the backstory that it is definitely good. I agree with you. It's well thought out. All these kids are children of some super powered beings that were in the Gen 12 program. Now they're bringing these kids in and trying to get them to have power so they can use them. Threshold seemed like a dastardly villain. You're sitting there wondering, these kids were trying to escape with their parents. Now Threshold, or Matthew and Nicole, they're evil.
Well, it's the inversion of the Batman thing. Think about Batman. When you see it, you always see his parents get blammoed. But then he's a good guy. You see that a lot of times in fiction. It's a trope. Well, they show you that, but instead they become bad guys. So it's a very interesting inversion of that trope.
I love seeing Pit in this. I love seeing Pit show up in issue 3, just to see him throw down with Caitlin. And actually, you're just waiting for them. It's great to see Pit he's just about to think twice because he's got that other alien in his head telling him to slow down. And he's like, nah. And he bears his claws and he's ready to, they continue to fight. They're going through floors of this facility, which is awesome. Just watch them tear things down. I was down for that. I knew that jerk was Threshold that whole time. I was like, who is this guy? I smell a rat. It's not like they hit it very well. I'm sure it was intention because even Caitlin Fairchild says she, it's kind of odd that he brought a suit. Things were obviously adding up to that Tom Hanlon was going to end up being Threshold. I had a good time. Anything you guys can think of? Dean, you said you had some stuff. It's
especially odd that the suit he brought had that garter on it. Like, why would you bring that part? Like, hey, listen, here's your swimsuit and your garter.
Right.
All right, so that gun that Caitlin picks up, why does it have another magazine taped to the other magazine? That's not how guns work. Unless the idea is where she's going to take it and switch magazines or what the fuck ever. But even that, I think it would just get jarred off. Like, it's funny the things that you'll accept. You're like, oh yeah, Pitt, blah, 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 blah. That's the first thing I thought. I was like, that's not how guns work.
Fair point.
And I think it looks dumb.
Okay. Anything else? Is that it?
How many other opinions?
That's great.
IO is a dumb name. International Operations is a dumb name. Have y'all ever watched American Greed? It's on CNBC. It's about people that do scams.
But do you know why it's called IO in the grander sense?
Tell me.
It's interesting. And I'm sure this is a retcon. I don't think anyone thought about this when it came out. But it's binary. It's the idea of 1 and 0. So one is something and 0 is nothing. The idea for IO is unlike SHIELD or Argus or Checkmate or any of the other organizations that exist to help the superheroes. IO is not anyone's friend. It is every awful story of the CIA that Dean Compton can tell you about working in another part of the world. That's IO. They are that attribute taken to its extreme. Every conspiracy theory is true. The New World Order exists. It's being funded by the American government, and they are going to take over everything. That's what IO is. It's this much bigger thread. A lot of this that I'm pulling from is not in the Gen 13 book. It's from a book called Sleeper, which Ed Brubaker will write about a decade later. But they really go into the idea of why is IO so powerful? Why is it able to operate in a world where the UN is big enough and wealthy enough to fund Stormwatch, and Halo's got unlimited money to fund the Wildcats. So it's this kind of like the shadow actors, the actors in the background who are dealing with stuff. So IO is a terrible name, I agree, but I at least like that they were trying to do something different. There's a reason they're the big bads of this book.
That all said, it's a dumb name. The binary thing's actually somewhat interesting. I wonder if James Robinson did that later. That sounds like a theory. I know he messed with this stuff later on. Even Joe Casey may have done something like that. These are guys who can think and look at that kind of thing and change it without changing. But I was saying on American Greed, they do a lot of scams. It's always about scams and companies that do Ponzi schemes. Their name's always like Financial Futures or Money Unlimited. And you're like, what? That's how international operations comes across to me. If I heard this name, I would think they were just a scam. Oh, we're international operations. Like, you don't do anything. Like that. So that's the feeling I get from IO. I do really like their headquarters, though.
Yeah.
Later.
The towers?
That's really good. I've driven by Quantico a lot because you can see it from I-95 or whatever it is. It might not be Quantico. I can't remember, but it looks weird and dumb in a good way. There's nothing to dislike for the most part about the first 3 issues except the kind of stuff we've already mentioned. Some of the risque humor is probably a little cringe, and the Bliss and Threshold back and forth is pretty cringe. They should probably come up with other names because they're like, oh, these are the Black Razors, but now I'm bringing in the Black Hammers. Yeah. Guys, this could get really easy to mess up, especially if you're like, oh no, the War Guard has escaped. We got to get some people out. Don't accidentally say Black Razor when you mean Black Hammer, when you mean, Black Lightning, Black Talon, Black Goliath, whatever it's going to be.
Do you think this was Marvel method, though? Because that just feels like something cool that Campbell drew and someone had to come back in and Stanley up the dialogue to explain.
I do think there was probably an idea that there would be different levels of elite within these soldiers. And I think that they wanted to kind of tie it together. And I think actually both Black Razor and Black Hammer sound cool. Although Black Hammer maybe, that may be a little Nazi. You know what I'm saying? Like, it feels like something they might have said. I have to go back and look, but they sound cool, and I think that's what it was. Oh, we have the Black Hammers, the Black Razors, the Black, whichever one's next, the Black, Black Guard. You probably have an Ocean version. It's almost like stripped down G.I. Joe in a way, but the names are a little similar. And I could see that being very funny in an emergency where you said, oh, I meant the other one. Well, it's too late now. We've lost Cincinnati. Everybody's a lot of fun. It's fun that, honestly, seeing Freefall smoke, I don't think people should smoke, but it is refreshing because teenagers just smoked a lot more then. Like, I knew Freefall and I was friends with Freefall. It's funny to think that these are supposed to be Gen Xers. By rule, aren't they? I mean, I guess Caitlin's 20, but the rest seem to be a little younger. Aren't they actually like millennials? But we don't have that term yet.
No, if you're a 20-year-old in 1990, millennials weren't born.
I said Caitlin is a Gen Xer for sure, but I thought the others were like teenagers, like younger.
I would still say you were Gen X because I would say in 1994, millennial is even younger than that. Maybe you're right.
Millennial. Okay, I was born in 79, and I'm definitely one of those. They call it Zennials. It's like 79 to 83 or 84. I don't really belong to either of these generations. I'm good without the internet, but I know how it works too. And oh my God, information superhighway. It's just, I'm just being a little nitpicky, but it's funny. And it's also funny that they named him Grunge right as Grunge was like getting out.
Oh yeah.
Like Grunge is about done.
This is another thing you could do if you brought them back and they were in middle age, right? They could have the next generation, the Gen 23 could be 25-year-olds at that point, or even younger. Yeah. Like that would be a good compare or contrast.
I was just sitting here thinking, it just hit me that this is a 30-year-old comic, but go ahead.
Yeah.
It's 30 years old, just like me.
Oh,
just like you. No cap.
Don't. But I feel like if they did that modern day comic, like Grunge would be that guy trying to be like, oh, I got that Riz. Like,
he would be. That's my point. Yeah, that's my point. He absolutely
you're not. You should stop. But then he should do something cool to save the younger ones. Like, he does have that Riz. You know what I mean? That's what winds up happening because, I don't know, that sounds like a fun moment. And this is full of fun moments. You can really tell that this is a time. J. Scott Campbell, who I love his work, by the way. Nice guy, too. Follows the page.
Yeah, he did.
And every now and then comments about something. And if you're nice to him, every now and then he'll answer a question.
I think we said we hit the big time.
Yeah.
Well, as soon as we saw that he joined, we were like, oh, wow, we're here. We're here.
Finally.
We have arrived.
I cashed out my life insurance policies. I don't care what happens now. I don't care what happens now. Later on, when he's doing the covers, it's easier to miss his Art Adams influence, but you really see it here. And now you can still see it when he's just doing covers, but since you're not seeing page after page of it, I think you have to look a little harder for it. And he certainly changed his style a little bit as people evolve. But at this point where he's just taken off, and there are things he's trying. I mean, every now and then something doesn't work, but most things work because he's just going and going and going. And you can tell this guy's just eating and sleeping and breathing drawing right now. Everything about these issues that he's on, I find that they work. There's an energy to them that, while very much of the 90s, is also very much its own thing. Tying into J. Scott Campbell, who's known for drawing beautiful ladies, this is almost a backdoor Bad Girls comic. Bad Girls were starting to take off and everything, Lady Dance, Vampirella, She, Helena, nude variant. My God.
Whoa.
My God, Lightning Comics done. But this would, if you were a fan of Bad Girl comics, I don't even think J. Scott's a Bad Girl artist. It's not what I'm saying because the style's kind of different. But here were some sexy ladies who looked slightly different, and you could come here and get that if you were a fan. If that's why you were buying comics at the time, there were a lot of people who were buying comics for sexy lady stuff at the time. We can argue about whether that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that's what it was. And so this is kind of a backdoor way. Maybe if you come in here, this really hits that mode where you're like, okay, it's kind of almost good girl art to the bad girl art in a way. And you could get somebody in here who was only reading comics for that style, for that genre, and now they like the Wildstorm universe. Now maybe they're picking up Deathblow, which has decidedly fewer sexy names.
Darry, anything else you wanted to say on these first three?
Have the plot point where you find out they all have some sort of psychic rapport with each other.
Caitlin wakes up and has that vision.
Yeah, Freefall and her have that connection.
Right.
So that surprised me because I had no idea what that was about. They mentioned something else earlier in the book, I think in issue 1, where Ivana says, thankfully, all these Gen active kids are attracted to each other. Like it's interesting because I really do feel like, these guys were sitting around the studio saying, well, we have to make sure they're not just mutants, right? They're not just X-Men. They're not just what we've seen before, what we're known for doing, what the market's doing. We have to do something different. So I feel like there's all these little bits and pieces. They never tell you exactly what the Gen factor is. We know the government can put people through the worst day of their life and they might get superpowers as a result, but they never actually tell you what it is, right? Like all the Stormwatch people get their powers from a comet. The Wildcats get their powers from aliens. There's a lot of different reasons for superpower here, but I like the idea that with Gen 13, they were like, something else is going on here. Like these aren't just, a superhuman isn't just a human who's been changed. It's a truly different thing. It's a terrifying force. So I like the little instances where it's like, oh, I can sense you, I can find you, I can go after you. It begins to make them the other. And you can see that a lot with Threshold and Bliss, where it's like, well, these two are completely unredeemable. Like you're not going to be able to save them. But that's not true for the Gen 13 kids. And they might turn out to be way more powerful than you think they are once they reach maturity. I think the world building is really on point here. I like the fact that this is set squarely in a universe that has existed and is going to continue to exist, but you don't necessarily need to have read all of Deathwatch and Stormwatch.
Man, Deathwatch. Hell yeah. Let's get that Deathwatch. Ghost Rider showing up right now. Or that's Nightwatch, isn't it? Nightwatch is...
No. Deathwatch. Nightwatch was...
Nightwatch is the Spawn-looking guy.
Yeah. Nightwatch was the Spawn-looking guy that showed up in backup stories and issues of Spider-Man. Deathwatch was, he fought Danny Ketch. He was like a ninja zombie drug runner. I love that.
Yeah, who was like, I remember his card, and it was like, 1991, he goes, what I really want to do is watch him die. I'm going to die myself. And I was like, this guy's bad. I hope Ghost Rider stops.
Yeah. Is he the one that gets his throat slit, or is he the one that slits someone's throat in like Ghost Rider 50? Because I remember me and Chris covered it, and I think Deathwatch was the big bad, obviously, in that one. And I feel like he either got his throat slit or he slit somebody's throat.
Danny got his throat slit at one point, and they had to put him in stasis, and Doctor Strange winds up doing super surgeries.
That's what I'm thinking of then, man.
That's in the Rise of the Midnight Suns.
Yeah, all right. Anyway, Deathwatch.
I would read the Ghost Rider Gen 13 crossover, and it would be for comic book stores. It would be easy to put on the shelf because alphabetically it's already right there.
Good point.
That's true.
All right, go ahead, Darry. You got the floor, buddy. Anything else?
I am very fond of any book that has pinups, and I knew it was a big thing.
Yeah.
I love going through here and seeing a different artist draw the characters. These are new characters at the end. I don't know that a lot of people were tearing these out and hanging them up, but it's just nice. Today you can see fan art of I absolutely did.
I used to get the previews magazine just to tear out like the full page ads.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's great.
Oh man. So on my wall it's like Solar number 17 coming. So just in case you want to know, that'll be here in August.
Going back to what I was saying before about all the visual choices he makes. It's a lot of little things. When we first meet Fairchild and you see her dorm room, she's talking with her traditionally gorgeous over the top roommate. And she's like, well, I don't take up a lot of space. The room is drawn so that most of the room is the roommate's crap. And Caitlin has this tiny
little
corner.
Bed.
Yeah, and I like that because that tells you a lot about the character, using the visual language. Grunge, when you see him later on, he's covered in tattoos. Very generic tattoos, the type you'd see as examples of tattoos. I feel like those were very easy to speak.
The most in the book might actually be the one when they're all in the jackets and it looks like they're taking a test and Grunge is copying and they're all kind of doing their thing, because that gets across a lot of them right there. Yeah. Also, that lady who's putting on the class bra, like fucking Fairchild's like fucking roommate.
Yeah.
Two things. Number one, like, she's smart or she wouldn't be at Princeton. They try to tell me this lady's dumb. That's not how it works. Like, she's a boyfriend to do her homework. Number two, no way that lady is in a dormitory or has a roommate. That lady lives off campus, bro.
Off campus.
Between that and the guns, that's it. We're done with this book.
I can't believe anything about it. Hey, I just like to point this stuff out for humor's sake. I don't really care.
I know.
The gun did bother me a little bit, but that has more to do with gun safety. I grew up around guns, and so when something like if it was just a super laser and had no magazines, I wouldn't have noticed anything. But I'm like, you have a magazine taped to a magazine. Somebody might do that. You see people do dumb stuff with guns, and I'd hate for somebody to have got the idea from this thing. Not that it was probably a problem, honestly, but my first instinct when I see something like that with guns is like, wait. That's not real, and it's dangerous.
I love with Pitt and Timmy, too, because Pitt shows up out of nowhere, and John Lynch is like, oh, I captured Grey Hulk here in the desert, and I have to entomb him in your facility. And I just
for the night.
Yeah, just for the night. After that, we'll take him to the vault or something. I just really like the idea of there being a 3-page story that no one ever bothered to write down, where Pitt's just sitting in the desert, and John Lynch is like, you're dangerous, right? And he's like, I am very dangerous. Please take me to jail where the little boy is being kept. And John Lynch is like, yeah, sure. Great. I'll absolutely do that. And poor Timmy, if I'm remembering correctly, wasn't he also part of Cyber Data? Like, in addition to being taken over by the Black Razors and IO?
No, there was a cyborg or android Timmy over in Cyber Data.
Those are different characters.
Different people. Pretty sure.
Yeah, but don't forget when those weird twins kidnapped him in Bad Rock and Company.
Yeah.
That was Timmy. That wasn't good. I liked that too because they do a really good job making the organization feel real. And one of the ways is like, I've got a level 6, like these are the orders. These are standing orders. I have to go to the place closest and then get reinforcements. And you look at Pitt and you're like, yeah, you need reinforcements. Like the entire continent of Asia's armies will need those, plus 3 more guys.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I really did like that. And he was doing it on purpose to get at her, you know. I mean, like, this is a guy who knows how to turn a dandelion into, you know, a sniper rifle in the field. He also read all the books and knows all the bylaws and appendices. And he's like, these are the rules you have to follow. He's very Nick Fury, but I think you get to see him do a lot more of this kind of stuff than Nick Fury does. Nick Fury just usually it's just like tell superheroes not to do something that they are going to do anyway, or he's fighting Hydra.
Yeah, that's a really good point. The Nick Fury who exists at the time doesn't resemble this character as much as the ultimate Nick Fury that would come out after this, who was much more like, hey, Shield's a real deep cover, questionable organization, and they got their fingers in a lot of pie. So, yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's arguable that this character might be merged back into him once they start casting Sam Jackson. Not that Nick Fury wasn't cool or never did anything, but at this point his title's over and mostly he's just and mostly he's showing up in other places. Now it seemed to be cooler to portray him as a guy who wouldn't let things happen, as opposed to like when he would drop in Marvel Team Up and he'd be like, good to see you, Spider-Man. We need all the help we can get. You know what I mean? Like he kind of changed more to that guy where he's like, I gotta tell you no, Spider-Man, don't do that. And then he goes, I hope the kid does well. I take the cigar for everyone because you can't see this. But that was a very fake Nick Fury, but I had a fake cigar to go with it. I could hear Hasselhoff when you were talking. So.
Oh yeah.
Great series so far.
All right, I'm gonna blast through these next 4. Pitt and Caitlin, guns are drawn on them. They realize they're on the same side. Pitt's finally talked into it. Hey, look, this is your friend. Just as Lynch's Black Razor team aims their guns at them, Ivana, seething with rage, wants them dead, but Lynch insists he has the situation under control. Ignoring him, Ivana grabs a gun and shoots 2 of Lynch's team members. Caitlin leaps into action, attacking Ivana, who calls for her heavy weapon squad. Meanwhile, Sarah, Bobby, Grunge, and Roxy find Timmy and learn from him that Caitlin and Pitt were fighting. Determined to help, they jump down to the level where the battle rages. Amidst the chaos, Grunge is shot, but his body heals instantly, and he spits out the bullets. A keeper, which is the name of Ivana's soldiers, captures Timmy, but Pitt saves him by busting through the walls to escape the facility. See you later, Pitt. Lynch, see you later. Lynch calls in the Black Hammer.
When Keon gets out of the studio.
Lynch calls in his Black Hammer unit to eliminate Ivana's keepers and capture the kids. He reveals to Caitlin that his mission is to shut down the Genesis facility and end the experiments. Lynch is trying to explain, hey, look, I'm kind of on your side here. I don't want you guys being, treated like this. As they attempt to escape with Lynch, he explains that he was part of Team 7. Soldiers exposed to the Gen Factor, right? Help me out here, Darry. Just keep track. Make sure. I think you said this already.
You're good.
Now, he was part...
There were 7 of them, Jesse.
7.
Okay.
Team 7.
Right. They're not like the Big 10.
All right. The U.S. organization International Operations realizes the children of Gen 12 inherited powers and began hunting them down. So Lynch is giving Caitlin the whole backstory here. Lynch leads the team to a disposal chute, says get the hell out of here, and stays behind to settle the score with Ivana. As the team escapes the facility, this is issue 5, Threshold appears, offering them a chance to join us. They refuse and attack. Bobby
what
gets
a weirdo.
Bobby gets his flames thrown back in his face. Grunge turns his arm to rock, but has it snapped off. And Caitlin's attacks are shrugged off as well. They realize Threshold at this time can also read their minds. Meanwhile, Lynch confronts Ivana, and as she tries to escape, Ivana taunts Lynch, suggesting he join her or face Craven's wrath. Lynch pulls his gun only to discover Ivana has cybernetic enhancements. She uses them to capture Lynch, but he unleashes his powers, causing her cybernetics to malfunction. Her team rushes to her aid, and she activates a self-destruct sequence for the Genesis facility. On the ground, Sarah and Roxy strategize against Threshold. He boasts about rounding up the other Gen 13 to form an unstoppable army. Nicole finds Bobby, and she looks to have her way with Bobby. But Sarah incapacitates her with an electrical charge, planning to use her as a bargaining chip. Just then, Threshold sees Ivana's helicopter leave as the top of the building explodes. Enraged, he attempts to kill Caitlin and Grunge, but Lynch arrives with his Black Hammer team. Sarah appears with Nicole as a prisoner, offering to let her go if Threshold leaves. Swearing that the war is not over, Threshold grabs Nicole and flies off. Lynch offers to help the team go underground to avoid authorities and become stronger. They all agree, ready to face whatever comes next. And we know what comes next? Issue 1/2.
Half. 0.5.
0.5. Just outside Centerville, California, Caitlin, Bobby, Grunge, and Roxy are lost, sticking to back roads to avoid detection. They stop at a gas station where a mysterious woman named Loran materializes out of nowhere, searching for a fellow time traveler named Langston. When policeman arrives to try to stop her, Loran uses her powers, leading Bobby to believe she's one of Ivana's keepers, so he transforms into flames, and Loran zaps him. Grunge trips Loran with a well-placed beer can and turns to metal just as Loran blasts him with her fusion can. Caitlin attacks, but is shot for her trouble. It does. Loran hurls it's probably Lauren. That's probably the way I should have went with that. But all right, whatever. Lauren.
You just call her the Traveler.
The Traveler. She is called the Traveler. That is her name. The Traveler.
Sounds like somebody racking up some miles on some ad campaign, Southwest or something, introducing the Traveler. Did you know Southwest gets double airlines on Sundays or what the fuck ever?
Lauren hurls a truck at bystanders, but Roxy stops it only to be blasted by Lauren. Grunge surprises Lauren with a punch that slams her into a leaking tanker truck. As Lauren emerges, Roxy tosses a lit cigarette, igniting the gasoline. Lauren survives. Caitlin tears apart her technology. Just put tech there. Tears apart her tech. You could just
put tech. It would work.
It works.
Yeah. You called yourself out. You called yourself out.
Nobody will hear it. Lauren laments her failed mission, fearing for her world and her time. The team leaves Lauren tied up, screaming for release to fix chrono ripples that these kids have caused.
That happens.
Jump in the pool, you cross some chrono ripples.
Yeah.
Issue number 0. Caitlin's on a bus to Portland, planning to reunite with the team after splitting up to avoid detection. At the bus stop, she meets her cousin Karen. Karen's boyfriend, Brad. Brad reveals he's been paid by government agents to lead them to Caitlin. When Caitlin tries to flee, Brad threatens.
Shit, man.
When Caitlin tries to flee, Brad threatens Karen, no regard for the baby in her arms, prompting Caitlin to stop and shove him.
And in front of God and everybody. He's like, listen, we're at this train station, but I do not care. Or what? It is a train station, yeah.
Well, Caitlin shoves him into a wall.
Smart.
The agent The agents stun both Caitlin and Brad with whatever weapons that they have. Dazed, Caitlin escapes but is hit by an oncoming train. Emerging unharmed, she lifts the train off the track and throws it at the agents. She mainly uses it as a wall to give herself a little more time to get away. A man named Wesley arrives and says, "Get in, hop in the car," claiming Lynch has sent him. Caitlin hops into his car and they head to the airport. He drops her off. In Arizona, Bobby travels across the desert to pick up Sarah from a Native American reservation.
No way the feds can get you at this airport.
Sarah introduces Bobby to her Uncle John and insists they watch a ceremony appreciating the land. Bobby is initially dismissive, but Sarah explains the Apache pride and their heritage, which, by the way, according to it was imagefandom.com, Ripclaw is not Apache. He is Cheyenne, apparently.
Okay.
But a lot of people, it actually says in there that a lot of people believe that he's Apache.
Okay. Right on.
All right.
See what Robotech Wiki says about it.
Source of all human knowledge.
I have a subscription and I haven't upped it recently, so I'm going to have to.
That shit's behind a paywall.
It's funny because anyone can update these fandom wikis, and there's nothing stopping someone from creating, the Robotech wiki actually does exist, but there's no one stopping them from creating a page about Ripclaw or Cyberforce or any of the characters that we talk about, and then at the very bottom having a line that says there's no connection to Robotech. There's no disinformation campaign here. There's no one stopping them.
I heard that this guy wrote a bunch of episode synopses for Street Sharks and put a bunch of stuff that didn't happen in there. What, Jesse?
I think I remember you talking about this. It's crazy.
He made up a transgender character and stuff.
That's crazy.
I mean, it makes sense, right? All these big sites want user-generated content. And it's like, well, yeah, what did you think was going to happen?
What's sad is that not one of them, despite his tragic passing, have mentioned the guy with the knife from Madison Square.
Oh, my goodness.
Like, one of them should be... there should be a fandom for him on every wiki, actually.
That's the truth.
If anyone listening to this wants to create a fandom wiki for the show and our continuity, you let us know, or just do it and never tell us about it, and we'll see if we can find it in the wild.
Yeah. Definitely use some of our continuity, but throw your own stuff in there, and I'll see if I can.
Yeah.
I'll see if I can.
It's all canon,
I'll be like, no, he never fought Barry Allen. He fought Wally West.
Bobby is initially dismissive, but Sarah explains the Apache pride and their heritage. Bobby apologizes, sharing his own struggles with loss and finding belonging at Project Genesis. Sarah reassures him that as long as they have each other, they'll be fine. The next day, they head to Vegas to pick up Roxy and Grunge. In Vegas, Roxy and Grunge search for Roxy.
All of a sudden in your head, you see those the Vegas shots from the air, like Frank Sinatra singing. They're like, Vegas!
Perfect.
I don't think that's a real Frank Sinatra song, but you.
Oh, well, it should be.
It felt like one.
I should have just lied. I'm like, oh, yeah, that was Vegas. You know that one, Frankie, baby.
Frankie, baby. Roxy and Grunge are searching for Roxy's stepmom at Nero's palace. With their last $5, Grunge devises a plan to win big at roulette. And I believe he's getting Roxy to use her powers, maybe to kind of skew things. Possibly. They score some serious winnings, attracting the attention of the casino runner Vito Spinelli. Vito makes Grunge for a Chinese triad hitman because of a jacket given to him by another Asian player. Security closes in. Roxy creates a diversion, allowing them to escape. They transform into a statue. And as far as I'm just throwing this out here because I know I'll probably forget, but I think Grunge's powers and watching his powers evolve throughout these issues is really cool.
It is.
I mean, it's actually he's the one that comes up. His powers are the most latent, I guess you would say, because I think by the end of issue 2,
he has to get tortured to get him out, and he has to really say some tough guy stuff to the back.
Right. He has no idea what he can do because it takes him by complete surprise. But he does some crazy stuff, especially here where he grabs Roxy and they both transform into a statue. Of course, Roxy's really excited at the end of this. She can't believe that he's actually going to transform other people into his things. Security closes in. Roxy creates a diversion, allowing them to escape. They transform into a statue and then back into flesh to evade capture. Discovering Grunge can transform others. Just in time, Sarah drives up and they hop in the van, speeding away. Elsewhere, Lynch infiltrates International Operations Headquarters using a nearly invisible suit. I think it is actually all invisible, although you can see his head kind of floating around. I was worried like everybody else is going to see that. That's not the case.
Well, I don't know.
Somebody sensed that it was another lady by the name of Alicia that he passes by who senses his thoughts and realizes, oh, yeah, you may be invisible, but I can pick up on what you're thinking there, brother. Anyway, he breaks in, downloads all of the Project Genesis data, then deletes it off of their mainframe. And then as he's getting ready to leave, he's confronted by some old friends, Alicia and Colby. Colby lets Lynch go, but severs their friendship. So he's like, we're not friends anymore. I owed you one. I'm letting you go, but this is it. And then in the final story here, we have Caitlin, Sarah, Bobby, Roxy, and Grunge reuniting at an address that Lynch gave them. And they find Lynch awaiting inside, ready to put the team to work. That is the final 2 issues of the main series, the mini, which is 4 and 5. And then issue half and issue 0. Darry, I'm going to let you go first here, man.
Well, the first thing we have to talk about is the fact that there is a very prominent letter from J. Scott Campbell about how he is mad at Wizard.
He really reads them for filth. Emily watches Drag Race a lot, so we picked up a lot of the slang. It's like you read somebody, you call them out for like, you suck. This is what's wrong with you. You're not funny.
You've used this term before too, I think, and I completely forgot about it.
Is the line between Drag Race and professional wrestling as thin as I think it is? Is it almost non-existent?
Thinner.
Okay.
Drag and wrestling are like 99.6%.
Okay.
Oh, that's great.
All right, good. I just got a kick out of it because J. Scott Campbell takes a half a page of his comic and says, I want to respond to Wizard the Comic magazine saying that this book is specifically structured to appeal to the lowest common denominator and has no substance. The thing that I couldn't figure out is whether or not they were both in on it. This absolutely seems like something that Wizard would be like, all right, we're going to make fun of you guys. You make fun of us, and then that will kind of generate the faux controversy that we need.
Speaking of wrestling, you're
right.
But that's what I'm saying. Comics have always stolen from wrestling. I mean, what is Stan Lee other than the world's greatest ringside promoter?
I think that Wizard meant this to come. I don't think it was a word. I do think it came across harsher and less tongue-in-cheek than Wizard meant for it to. And especially like J. Scott Campbell points out, we made money together. Yeah. You did a half issue. I've done 3 covers for you. So for you to all of a sudden be like sanctimonious and holier than thou about this, what the fuck, It kind of reminds me of like baseball, because like in 1998 when Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa were in the race, everybody loved it. But then like 5 years later, it was terrible. They were using steroids. But everybody knew they were using steroids then. Mm-hmm. They found Andrew in McGuire's locker. You guys made money off of it, and then you castigated them for doing it. I felt like Wizard was doing that. I think Wizard was just fucking around. And it came across harsher than it should. But he gets everything right. He's right. And the Team Titans line is the best. Where it's like, make a teen book, because teens like that. He's like, yeah, that's why Team Titans isn't canceled.
I just thought that was great. I live back in the day where you could, especially on an independent book, just get away with this nonsense. I can't imagine anyone today writing a thing, putting it in print, just being like, this is how I honestly feel about someone else in the industry.
They comment on their social media page.
I know, but social media is like, there's no barrier to entry, right? Like someone bought this. I hate social media. Like someone bought this comic book back in 1994, 1995 and got to the last page and saw the artist like crap on something that had happened elsewhere in the community. And the days before the internet, or the internet being what it was in 1994, that was probably a really interesting thing to come across. It doesn't seem to affect anything, because I know I wasn't reading Wizard until after now, and I remember Campbell's artwork, the character of Fairchild and Gen 13 being very prominent. So it's not like it had a lasting effect, but I got a kick out of that, especially considering that Campbell hasn't been in the industry that long. The best line in it is, for me, and Dean, you mentioned this earlier, he says, "Get it right. I'm not a Jim Lee clone. I'm an Art Adams clone." I literally laughed out loud when I read that, because I love someone who has a lot of self-awareness, and Campbell clearly does. We've talked a lot about the plot. I think it wraps up really well. It's it's interesting that it was one of those miniseries that went from 4 to 5, but I really do feel like you get everything out of here. It ends in a place where you definitely want to pick up the next issue. It gives you just enough of the larger story. We're not having all of the Gen 12, Team 7, Black Ops nonsense worked out at the end of the 5th issue. Doesn't make you feel like you didn't get a story. It definitely makes you say, well, wait a second, what else is going on there? Who are those other characters? Who are their parents? What's going on here? It certainly hooked me when I read it in trade later on. I really enjoyed this. I have to say, though, the thing I really enjoyed the most was the issue 0, because so many times these issue 0s, these half issues, these whatever issues, they're just a waste, right? They're just, you buy them, they're a crapshoot. This one I liked because you got a variety of different art styles and you got the first solo adventures with your new favorite characters, right? So you got to see everyone interacting. I thought the Vegas story was really good. It was like an inversion of Natural Born Killers where these teenagers are just too dumb to get into a lot of trouble. I already mentioned the evolution of Grunge's powers. Again, it's kind of hinting at like when these guys get up to speed, when they're really coming to their own, they're going to be a force to be reckoned with. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I have to say the entire thing of what we read, for me, the low point was issue 1/2. Because I love Stormwatch, but having this thing end with, and then go read about the adventures of Lauren the Traveler in Stormwatch. I couldn't even find that issue all these years later. That left me a little cold. I was a little annoyed about that. But aside from that, I really don't have a bad thing to say about this. I think a lot of it's aged.
Upset about that, honestly. I wouldn't care so much, but it was a half issue.
What was a half issue?
Your half issue is designed to get me to buy something else. I already went out of my way to buy something. I had to get the coupon and put in the thing.
Later on.
I thought it wrapped up just neatly enough to where it's not a big complaint, but you're right. Don't try and sell me something else when I've already gone out of my way to buy something from you.
Yeah, it was small. I thought the design.
At the very least, continue it in the thing that's already existing. At the very least, be like, hey, for part 2, it's in Gen 13 project, or whatever. And then
it was a weird choice because if there was a chance that someone was going to buy the 1/2 issue and they hadn't already read the miniseries, you could have reached a very large audience. And then to get the thing and to be like, go read Stormwatch. It's like, well, I don't want to read Stormwatch. I want to read Gen 13. I'm going to skip this whole thing and go back to my X-Men books.
I would assume a lot of people bought the half issue that might not have gotten the miniseries because the mini was hot. It was hard to get, number one. Yeah. So somebody like, I'm going to get the half issue and maybe see what it's.
I bought a lot as a Wizard reader. I bought a lot of half issues for monthly books. I bought every half.
That's what I was saying about Gen 13. It was a hot book. So let me see if it's going to get an ongoing in a minute, right? Yeah. Let me see if it's worth the trouble. Oh, now you want me to buy Stormwatch?
Yeah. So that was weird, but again,
great point. But yeah, it's a minor complaint.
It's a minor. I mean, it's not make or break.
Finish enough to where you don't feel ripped off. Yeah. I wish they'd have put character profiles in this.
Yeah.
I think that's a missed opportunity for the half issue because a lot of people are like, tell me a little bit more about these guys. Yeah. But that's showbiz, baby. That's showbiz.
Yeah. That's showbiz. But yeah, I think this is a great book. I really do wish DC or someone would bring them back and not try to connect them to whatever nonsense is currently going on over there. Just bring them back. Let them tell a good story. And if you want them to cross over with whatever ridiculous version of the Teen Titans you currently got going on, do that later. But they don't need that. They barely have costumes. So it's just, this is your classic story of, kids have been screwed over by the previous generation. They got to find their own path. It's an evergreen story. It's as relevant today as it would have been back then. So I really do wish someone would bring it back. I feel that way in general about all the Wildstorm titles over at DC. So here's hoping.
It has a better chance to be brought back than Generation X. If for no other reason you can turn Gen 13 into something else that will make it less of the time, Generation X is what it is, baby. You know what I mean? You might be able to change it a little bit to focus more on the X than the generation, but it's always going to have a certain connotation. Gen 13, you can just be like, I thought they were the 13th generation of Americans. Nah, it's just Project 13 now, or what the fuck.
Yeah, they tried to do that. Chris Claremont wrote a run on the book. Gail Simone tried to write a run on the book. And everyone tried to tell their own version with the visuals, with the ephemera, with the more ethereal stuff. But they didn't drill down and say, wait a second, there actually was the potential for an interesting story here. You should focus on that. You shouldn't just focus on, she's a shy kid who turns into a supermodel and she's got to deal with that. And this kid's kind of dumb and this one's gay. And it's like, those are all character attributes. That's not what the story's about.
This one's dumb. This one's gay.
Well, but that's what they. Oh, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying that when you're trying to figure out your characterization,
it's funny to hear it back to back. But you're right; they wind up so much more than that.
Oh, absolutely.
I think that's what you're saying. Is like when Chris Claremont and they wrote it, they kind of just went back to archetypes. And for Gen 13, I got a sense that it was never about who they were. It was about who they are and who they're going to be. And I think in a way that you don't get from Teen Titans or even New Warriors, this was very much about watching that journey. If you're going to go back to, this is the dumb one. Well, there's no reason grunge. We're watching a journey. There's no what. I know, but what if grunge at some point was like, man, I'm taking some classes at community college. Why are you doing that? Blah, blah, blah. I'm tired of not knowing things, guys. Like, I've seen people do that in their growth. I've seen quote unquote dumb people enrich themselves and get a lot smarter. I didn't party until I went to college. You know what I mean? Things change when you're young. And that's how I got the feeling from this book. We should be watching them change, not keeping them to anything that happens.
Or even you go the Miracle Man route with it. It's like take their powers to their...
Make them God. End all crime.
That's what I'm saying. It's like Grunge's powers, he could turn his girlfriend into a statue. He can take on the attributes of anything else. Well, he's doing it by reflex. What happens when he sits down and starts to do that? Can he take over an entire city? Can he affect the internet? Can he leave his body? There's no cap to all this stuff. It might turn out that Fairchild, the main character, the breakout star, is actually the least powerful one of the entire thing because all she can do is, be strong and be tough and be immortal or whatever else. So you can go in those directions. The evolution of their teenagers, by their very nature, they're transitory. Right. They're in between their beginning stages and their final stages. I'd love to see more of that.
If I brought them back, I would try and keep it finite. And watch them actually grow, and you can set stories later in something. But then I would have here's Gen 14. It's going to be who's next because we watched their journey. What's the next journey? It should lend itself neatly in a way that even Teen Titans or New Warriors don't to being generational. Why haven't you done Gen 16 yet or something? Where are you?
Preach.
At the very least, they're coming out with the Wildcats Compendium. There's just been more of an emphasis on reprinting some of this stuff. So you see what Marvel's done recently with Black Armor, the Warlock miniseries, and a couple other things. Maybe it's time to have a Gen 13 miniseries that's set in this time. Just go back and, I know you wanted to see them grown up, but there seems to be a market for a few new adventures from then. I'd give it a shot.
I'd buy it.
Well, I can say that I really enjoyed myself reading what I did here. I'm all excited about Pitt. I can't hammer that home enough.
No.
Learning about these kids and what they're going to do. I was just taking a look. The ongoing goes for 70-some issues.
I think it doesn't end until 2001 or 2.
That's a good run.
Yeah, it's a great run.
Really
especially considering that it was grown in soil that wasn't very fertile at the time.
True.
If you would ask somebody, what's the worst time to launch a brand new superhero comic? 1994, 95. Pretty good answer.
Rough ground. I don't know how much more you guys read, but I assume does Threshold come back at some point? He's got to, right?
No, that's it. You never see him again.
I don't believe what
they get their own book. So there's a couple of spin-offs of Gen 13. One of them is
DV8
featuring the Deviants and Threshold Bliss factor into that. That's Ivana's next plan. This one didn't work. Lynch took them from me, but we got more than enough kids floating around. I'm going to get the even more questionable kids. And that book was weird because it was actually launched by Warren Ellis. So that was one of his many books for Wildstorm, but he didn't stay on that one that long. It gets a little weird. And that book doesn't end particularly well. Most of those plot threads are wrapped up in another spinoff called Gen Active. It gets kind of rough for the kids going on, but
that's the one thing that could really stop them, right? Exploitation.
Exactly.
They had it, and I don't want to say they watered it down, but if you go look, I've downloaded a bunch of stuff, and there's a million Gen 13 bootleg. There's different annuals. There's a yearbook. There's Gen 13 European vacation. All of a sudden, whatever money was in this, they're going to squeeze it out of it.
Oh yeah. All right, Dean, what are your final thoughts?
I think this is obviously very much a product of its time. But I think it's also a product that has a timeless element of teenagers finding themselves. There's enough cringe stuff in here to where I'd be a little careful about who I recommended it to. But overall, it's a really fun book. We get to see these kids be kids around some very questionable adults with some very beautiful art. from several different people, like Travis Cheris on the Zero issue. Love that guy. Excited to see him. You can tell that big things are coming. They caught lightning in a bottle, whether they thought it was going to be as big as it wound up being for the time or not. They did catch that lightning in the bottle, and you cannot talk about 90s superhero comics, in particular the teenage side of 90s superhero comics, without discussing Gen 13, which arguably was the best of them all at its high moment. A great run. You don't think about it, but like New Warriors, we talk about, it's a really good run for the New Warriors. It's about the same run. Mm-hmm. It's about the same run as Young Justice. I don't know Generation X off the top of my head, but I bet it's similar, but I don't know. To wrap it up, it's a great series. Any fan of the 90s should read it. Like I said, fans of teen superheroes, fans of 90s superheroes, fans of great 90s art, you're not going to go, you're not really going to go wrong here. A little cringe, but this is probably an A- story.
I agree.
Probably give it like a 90, 91.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into plugs. Dean Compton, why don't you tell them about the Unspoken Decade?
The UnspokenDecade.com. We're doing great things over there. Lots of great articles. Just wrapped up the Herald ordeal Simby fan did. And also, I think he's doing Monster in My Pocket now. So watch out. We got a lot of stuff coming out in the 90s. Over at the Facebook page, we're up to 24,000 followers now. And there's a lot of reels. There's a lot of cool stuff going on. So come over, check us out. And definitely go to Speeding Bullet Comics, sbcomics.com. Find them on Facebook. Contact them for all your comic book purchasing needs.
Support your local comic book store, guys.
That's right. Hey, listen, folks, you're listening to the Source Material Comics feed, which houses this podcast, the Unspoken Issues Podcast, where we're talking 90s comics all the time. Plenty of ones in the archives, so go check those out as we're talking right now. Today released our discussion on the Protectors. We had me, Dean, and Darry had a great discussion about Centaur Comics. And
I wouldn't call it great.
Okay.
I'd call it amazing.
It's an amazing discussion that we had there. I learned a lot. It's got to be 45 minutes of what got cut because you guys were going on about the golden age. It was a lot of fun to hear you talk, and it made it right. It wasn't coming out of the podcast, but it's right there at the end. Lots of good discussion happening there. As for the Source Material Comics podcast, me and Mark Radlich are in the process of discussing Alias. I think Volume 2 is going to be happening here pretty soon. We've already got Volume 1 out there, which is like the first 9 issues. We did all 28 issues, so I don't know what Volume 2 was. I think it was like 11 through 15, maybe. Good discussion. We're actually going to knock that whole series out. Everything's recorded. So Volume 2 is dropping here pretty soon. So keep an eye out for that. And then, of course, with my buddy Evan Bevins, we were talking Marvel Snap. If you play the mobile card game Marvel Snap, you can hear me and Evan talk about that about once a month, 20-minute episodes real quick. We have a lot of fun. All right, we're out of here. That's Dean. Over there's Darry. I'm Jesse. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us. Unspoken Issues is part of the UnspokenDecade.com, the home for 90s comics, blogs, and podcasts. Unspoken Issues also has a Facebook group you can join if you are interested. Just search the Unspoken Issues podcast and request to join. All of this would not be possible without W2Mnet.com, so make sure to seek them out for more podcasts. If you enjoyed what you heard today, please feel free to share, and we look forward to entertaining you again soon.